All right, class. Everybody's in their places, smiles on their faces. It's time for another great episode of Professor Kimya's class. I'm your what's the word for it? The professor's assistant. Seiko Varner, and of course our great Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis is our professor. Today we're dealing with reducing black poverty in every generation. Doc, take the floor.
All right, thank you so much. So we're talking about reducing black poverty in every generation. And let's start with the next slide, please. All right, so I always start off with a discussion of the individual level and the family level because I focus on our culture and our collectives as a people and then the individual onus. A lot of people think that you have to start talking about society, the government, but you have to remember as a people, as Africans, as racially black people, you have to understand what it means to develop our inner world. And we have a lot of different scholars, black intellectuals, black activists over the centuries who've addressed this. Because if you only want to focus on pretending the government's going to constantly change, specifically for us, they can always talk about general changes, but when it's specifically for us to have direct and indirect effects for our people, if that's going to be the focus, then we're always going to be waiting for a savior. So that's why we're starting off at the individual level and the family level. So here's some questions that we always want to self-reflect and collective reflect. And again, this is individual level, so individuals can think about this, and also for families. What is your financial plan? What are you thinking of accomplishing? It could be a daily financial plan, it could be a weekly, monthly, annually, and it could be something over the next 5 years. So what's your financial plan? And here's what I recommend when talking about financial plans. It should be something that's realistic. If you're someone who says something like, I want to be a millionaire, I recommend you think something that's more touchable. And then the millionaire part, if that's really what you insist, then that can eventually happen. But it has to be something that's more realistic. And that can include other materials that you want to purchase. Something that's a material that's more realistic to purchase and is not considered more of a waste of money and a waste of resources. So what's your financial plan? The next one, what financial advice have you learned? This is where you ask yourself, and you can ask each other, where did you get this financial advice? And it has to be legitimate financial advice. It can't be your grandma said to save the cash in the pillow. It can't be being taught over the generations to save your cash in a mattress. That is historically done for various reasons, including not having access to banks. But we want to update. Our people have to continuously update. Because if we get stuck in what we've had to do for centuries, stuck in what we had to do over the generations by force, that means we don't want to eventually have choices, liberations, freedom, and options. So when learning financial advice, it's helpful to have friends, family with some financial advice, but it has to be legitimate advice. I always recommend having a legitimate, legally authorized financial planner. And similar to when you want to have someone who does your taxes, if you do your own taxes, that's wonderful, but make sure it's correctly done, legally done. And also financial advice, if you're talking about investments, make sure it's legal investments, because so many people are talking about Bitcoins and all types of things. And I always tell our people, it has to be investments that are legal financial advice, legally recognized by the government, by law enforcement. It can't be an under the table financial plan. It can't be under the table, off the record investment. And that happens quite often where people will tell you something abstract that they claim to have an investment in, and I always just want our people to be careful about that, because there are a lot of scams that go into that specifically target our people. And there's a lot of research and publications that address how our people, and when we're talking about the scammers are mostly within race. So the scammers tend to be our own people scamming each other because they know our culture, because they are part of our culture. All right. So that's number 2. Number 3, how does your financial plan impact your family? So again, you're looking at the individual level, but also looking at what's beyond you. Is it helping your family? If you do not have a bank account and you think that you're saving money under the mattress or whatever else you've been taught by your family to do, how can that impact your family in a negative way? Because you got to remember, the house can be caught on fire, therefore all the money's going to burn. The house can be burglarized, therefore the money's gone if people know how to find it. And by the way, most of the time when people burglarize or rob you face to face, it tends to be people who you know. They might be acquaintances and even family members. Sometimes people don't realize that when you invite people to your house for a cookout and you tell them about your business, like you've got some kind of safety locked key that has money and guns and so forth, if you're telling people from outside the house, you don't know what certain people are going to do to get inside your house and steal things. So those are all things to consider. How can this impact your family if you don't have lasting resources? Also, it's important to have the bank accounts for banks that oftentimes will send you information about things like free training classes about how to do a financial plan. So that has a positive impact on your family. So for example, credit unions that will give you access to information about interest, access to things like equity line of credit, if you don't want to use a credit card, what it means to have an equity line of credit, and also help with building up your savings account. So let's say right now you just want to have money in your checking account. I always encourage people to try to save at least $5 to $10, $15 in your checking account every month, as much as possible. And then if you have like a credit union account, there are some credit unions that will put a percentage of every purchase through a debit card, for example, and they'll put a percentage into your savings account. So that's your way of, you don't have to even look at your savings account. It's building up because you're spending money from your checking account and they put a percentage into your savings account. So these are all components to look at in terms of how it will impact your family as well. It should be a good impact, but also think about some potential negative outcomes if you don't plan ahead. And this includes planning ahead for emergencies and so forth. The 4th one, what teachings, lessons, and resources does your financial plan provide for future generations? So this is an example of, as a people, we also want to understand that culturally we have to have something that we're providing for future generations. And this is what we talk about regarding the Black inner world, the inner world development of our people. That's something that only we can do. Nobody else can develop our inner world as a people, individually and as a collective of people. And only we can shape that for the future generations of our people for the remainder of human existence. There's nobody else who can do that, okay? Governments can't do that. Schools can't do that, including HBCUs and predominantly Black K through 12. That's the onus is on families, communities, collectives to do that, and organizations to do that. So that's where you think about what is it regarding financial planning that you are teaching. And this includes when we're talking about poor, working class, and paycheck to paycheck middle class. It has to be something that's being taught. And the last one is number 5, which goes to the number 2 one, which is, do you have a financial advisor, financial planner? And it's wonderful to have family and friends, like I said earlier, who will give you financial advice and financial planning. But if you have someone in your life who's really getting some good financial advice from a professional, they will eventually tell you, stop asking me these questions, okay? They will eventually tell you that lovingly, because they eventually want you to put it on yourself to go out of your way to get that financial advice, because they don't want to be your unpaid advisor, especially since they don't know all of your life circumstances, right? Because our people are good at keeping secrets, right? We're good at keeping secrets, And then we want some good financial advice and financial planning. You cannot keep secrets about health issues and medical expenses. You cannot keep secrets about anything regarding life insurance and family circumstances. You can't keep secrets about employment status and anything else and expect people to give you financial advice. That's why an official financial advisor is going to require you to give all that information. They'll have access to your accounts, all of that, because what they do is they map it out for you. And that can include a diagram. They'll give you a diagram that shows here's how old you can be if you want to retire. And they can give you certain investments that will allow you to take out a certain amount of money every year to put into emergency funds, including paying for your house, all types of things. Again, family and friends cannot do that. That's why the official financial advisor and financial planner is necessary, because our people are good, are wanting other people to do that, but we have to do that part in getting someone who specializes in that. Okay? Next slide,
All right,
please.
Doc. I got a question, Doc. At what point of, income do I need to have a financial advisor?
As soon as you have an income, even before, like I refer people to financial advisors a lot, and this is people who might not have a job yet, but they might still have some kind of benefits coming in from their former employer, like insurance, health insurance, things like that. So you can still have a financial advisor. Some financial advisors are doing things pro bono until you have gainful employment. And then when it's employment, then they can talk about the percentage that they'll be paid as your financial advisor. So I recommend people of any kind of income level to have a financial advisor.
I do too, and I think it's kind of interesting that a lot of the people that I run into say, well, no, I need to wait till I make a lot of money before I get a financial advisor.
No.
Because I can handle it myself right now, but...
Nope, because, and this is one thing we talk about when we're talking about like young black people, like black youth, black juveniles, black young adults. Oftentimes they themselves are taught since childhood to live paycheck to paycheck, to not save anything. A lot of times some are taught when they get their first job when they're 16 years old, give the money to mama, right? And so, and it's not really teaching children what it looks like to have that money and what it means to know what you're not going to spend it on. Like, what does it mean to know that you have some checks coming in? What does it mean to know that even if you're not the one paying the bills, you're planning for a future where you will have bills to pay? So how do you plan that? And so that's just an example of the importance of people learning since childhood that if you're poor working class or paycheck to paycheck middle class, you're going to be like that forever if you think that you don't need a financial planner until you make money. Because until you make money is very subjective. Because you will be living paycheck to paycheck because you're not getting financial advice. And the financial advice will include breaking down what are you spending that you really don't need. There's so much money that people are spending that they don't need, like apps that they're downloading. I couldn't hear you. Can you say that again?
No, I love it, but I guess we can go to the next page now, right?
Oh, okay, because you paused real quick. Okay. All right, so this still is the individual level and family level. So this is looking at some in-person and virtual classes, some programs and events. And these are financial planning in-person and virtual classes. A lot of them are free. They could be at public libraries. They could be at community colleges and other colleges and universities, organizations, including black organizations that offer this. They're offering it in different cities, counties, and states across the nation. If you are curious as to how to get access to this, join meetup groups, look on Eventbrite, go to organizations' websites, go to library websites, get regular email correspondence so that you can register for these. They're very important. We have time to do this, I promise you. We have time, okay? And they're actually and some of them are so clear and concise that they don't do small talk. They do their program and they say, all right, y'all, peace. And that's how quick it is, because they want you to have access to information without a bunch of small talk. And they'll distribute sometimes their PowerPoint presentations. All right. And again, some of these programs are also tax funded. So as Black people, we have to remember that when things are paid through our taxes, we need to utilize what's paid through our taxes. It makes no sense that there's money that's coming through our income, and also there's sales taxes, of course. It's going to the government, that's local, state, and federal government. Everything that the government does is paid through taxes. It's not coming out of their pockets, okay? So therefore, as Black people, we have to use what we're paying for. We tend to be the only people who are confused about that.
I think it's novel because I never heard any of our thought leaders talk about using the things that we already pay for.
Well, sometimes you'll hear it in a different way. So when I teach courses, the health courses and crime-based courses and just general sociology, criminology courses, I always talk to our people about the proper representation of the Black Panther Party. Unfortunately, most people present the Black Panther Party as just berets and firearms and Mao, Stalin, Lenin, Marx, and all that stuff. Actually, the only time the Black Panther Party was effective was when they did those soup kitchens, clothing giveaways. They did the reading groups where they debated each other for knowledge development. And also on the corners of the streets, they did the health clinics. And they had nurses and so forth there. That's the only time the Black Panther Party was effective. But one component of that, though, is that the Black Panther Party had their plan. They mapped it out. And one part of that was talking about having free health access. So I want people to remember, whenever you hear free health access or universal health care, that is tax funded. So you'll hear people talk about what's paid through taxes, but they tend not to put tax in the title. They say it's free. And then people are supposed to be excited about that. But this is where I just want people to remember that when it's said it's free, that means it's paid through our taxes. Because it wouldn't exist any other way.
I'm stuck. You said that the only time that the Black Panther Party was effective is when they were doing community service.
It wasn't just community service. It was actually, they mapped it out. Their plan included health work, and they also were on the streets with the health clinics, and they had nurses and medical doctors out there. They had soup kitchens, clothing giveaways to poor working class people in general, so not only Black people. That's a more correct representation. So there's publications about that I give to my students and to the overall Black population around the world, so that our people can understand that we're talking about thousands of years of African radicalism and centuries of Black radicalism. You cannot present our radicalism as being berets and firearms marching down the street. Our radicalism actually is intellectualism. It's artistry. It's development of health resources, education resources, economic development resources. Because I'm telling you, non-Blacks don't care if we march down the street with firearms, right? That's not true development of our resources.
Okay. And so that's why you're saying it wasn't that part, that aspect of the Black Panther Party for self-defense wasn't effective, is because it didn't affect community change?
It didn't do anything. It was visible. But people have to understand the difference between visibility and effectiveness, right? Like you can do something because you're making a statement, but in terms of the outcome is still the same as before you did that, right? So effectiveness is a measurable outcome. That's why we do research. And so when we talk about health services like the Black Panther Party did, and I'm just using the Black Panther Party as an example because when I use like Elaine Brown's work, Kathleen Cleaver's work, I always talk about what it means to actually address the real issues and the real results that we're measuring that our people are doing to help our people.
Okay.
And that includes, though, when talking about when you're demanding something to be free and provided by the government, you're saying that this is coming through our taxes, though. And the government can increase our taxes because if we're saying we need more free services, I just want our people to understand what that entails. The government is never going to say they're going to reduce their salary and give it all back to these free programs, right? They're never going to say, oh, we're going to reduce our salary and give it into a better education system, a better health system. Our taxes are used locally, nationally, and globally, including military gear, police gear, all types of things around the world, right? So I just want our people to make sure there's an understanding, because if you were to do an audit of the state, local, and federal government, you would find a lot of things that are shocking, because your money's going all types of places, including because of the politicians that people support. Because every politician is doing some type of thing with the money that you would not support if you knew about it. Okay. And, I could do a completely different show about that, because, I talk about why we should
That's got to be a different show. When you talk about effectiveness.
Well, we did a previous show about that. We did a previous show.
New show coming up.
Yeah. All right. So the rest of this I've already talked about here. So when you just find the financial advisors, make sure it's like a one-on-one conversation. There can be some general advice, but most good, legally authorized financial advisors will tell you that it's not one size fits all. So we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so I already mentioned simple investments. Wealth building is a big deal, so I mentioned that earlier. I talked about building savings account. Wealth building, I want our people to understand, becoming wealthy does not mean you're becoming a millionaire. That's a huge, just like people present Black Panther Party as only being berets and firearms with leather jackets. A lot of people think wealth means you have to become a millionaire, right? And that's why a lot of people are so anti-wealth. Because it's like you're exploiting everyone. Actually, wealth means you're saving the outcome more than the input, right? That's what wealth building means. It means that you're bringing in money, you got to pay bills and all types of stuff, but you're building up the savings, you're building up your investments. So most people who retire, when they're talking about building wealth, they don't retire with $1 million plus. So I want our people to not be afraid of wealth, because non-Blacks are not afraid of wealth. I'm going to let y'all know that. And that includes non-Black radicals. A lot of non-Black radicals will have you thinking that they're anti-capitalism, they're backpacking across Europe, all that stuff. And if they are doing that stuff, trust me, they got wealthy sponsors, and they themselves oftentimes have wealth because they have investments. They have 401k, they have a savings account, all types of things. So I want our people to understand factual information about what it means to build up wealth. And it doesn't mean you're putting down $1,000 a month, though. It means that you're building up bit by bit, and then you're developing it throughout your life course.
Right.
That's the whole point. And the cash flow planning ties into that as well. So where you saving the cash, and the retirement income, Social Security benefits, disability insurance, living will, and life insurance. We can go to the next slide, please.
Okay. Interesting.
All right, so again, this is the collective and the societal. So as you notice, when I talked about the individual level and the family level, I talk about culture a lot, because that's what it means to develop our inner world as a people. So that's the collective level and the societal level. So collective level that's collectives of our people. It doesn't mean organizations, but it can include organizations. It can mean communities. It can mean a group that's been created, and it can mean organizations. And then we get to the societal level. So again, the first one here is, like I said earlier, utilize tax-paid services. I'm very adamant. So I do people's SNAP applications for EBT cards and other resources, including energy assistance resources. And I always tell people this is not a government handout. Okay, that's the second one. So 1A, services that are paid through our taxes is not free. It's not a government handout. A lot of times people will see me doing community resource tables that I do in different cities and different states with also some global collaborations. And people say, I don't want a government handout. Government is getting a handout from you, actually, when they take taxes through your income, right? Ooh, that's more like a handout. It's not a government handout when you pay for it.
Okay.
Right? Like you're going into the store, you paying for something, and then you're leaving it on the counter. Like, I don't need that. Like, you just pay for it, though. So what you pay for it for? So it's not a government handout. Okay? So many
That's a really
organizations and
freeing
institutions
concept.
receive. Yeah, it's not
That's
a
a
government
really
handout.
freeing
So
concept. Yeah.
yeah, so I want black middle class to understand that, and I want poor working class blacks to understand that, because of course Dr. William Julius Wilson, who we talked about 2 weeks ago, he focused on particularly poor working class blacks, and he talked about in the Truly Disadvantaged book the role that middle class blacks can play in helping poor working class blacks. But that's just
Okay.
something that we have to understand. We should not ever look down on these government resources, because again, most poor working class people have 1 and even 2, 3 jobs. They're paying taxes. They're paying income taxes. And most people are paying sales taxes anyway, because you're buying something. Even if you ain't got no business buying it, it usually comes with a sales tax.
Okay.
So I'm just very adamant about that part. Also, we want our people to remember that there are many organizations and institutions, including black organizations and black institutions, that receive government funded resources. And that includes government grants. So that includes the mayor's offices that will distribute funds. And they'll distribute funds to police departments. And the police departments will distribute funds to nonprofit organizations that do resources in black communities. The police departments will also distribute funds to do things like host basketball tournaments, host cookouts, host street block parties. I am not a fan of any of that. Okay? I don't believe in that much government intervention and that much government control. And that's very important to highlight that, though, because that's what it means to have integration of different perspectives, because we need some government presence, we need some law enforcement presence, but I promise you that the level of development of our people and liberation of our people should not be that the funds for these nonprofits that are doing work, that the funds come from the government this much. Yes, we can utilize the funds because, again, that's paid through our taxes again. But it can't be too many things that are only in existence because the government did it. Just like I don't want police departments showing up dressed in basketball gear talking about, we about to do some hoops. I want to do hoops, but not with y'all, but not with y'all here, though, you know? Like, we could do cookouts without y'all here. And that's a, as a criminologist, we talk about that a lot. That's not really community policing. It's not really community policing. Instead, it's a form of controlling where the funds are going. And I always want people to know that whenever there's a control as to where the funds are from, that means that those are the people who also control the results. Because you're not going to get grant funds from government entities and then you just do whatever you want to do with the grant funds. They're going to expect a certain result. So that's just something I want our people to consider as well. And this impacts particularly poor working class blacks. Next slide, please. All right. So the issue here, I think you might have a tab open on the side. I don't know if that would be what people can see. It says no notes over there on the left side. Can you see it?
Yeah, and I'm wondering where that came from.
It just popped up when you got to this slide. Oh, it's gone now. The Riverside is a different kind of space. So yeah.
Hey, this is a different beast. Salute to
Yes,
the folks
it is.
at Riverside. We're trying you out. We're trying to learn if you're somebody that we're going to spend our resources with. So shout out to y'all. We'll see if it works out.
That's right. All right, so this is more on the collective level and societal level, and this is again specifically looking at poor working class because we're talking about black poverty. So this is the second point here. If deciding to vote, be an informed voter beyond popularity and beyond jargon. So, and this is important for poor working class blacks because we want to understand what it means to talk about empowerment. I'm not one of those people who says vote or die. I do believe that we fought for the right to vote, but I don't believe in dismissing people who do not vote. I value every black person's opinion, okay? So I just encourage our people to never tell someone if you don't vote, your opinion doesn't matter. It actually does matter, okay? It does. And it's also a very huge misconception because over the years there have been some people who claim that most blacks vote. And that's a very false claim. It's misrepresented in some data sometimes too. Number one, if most blacks vote, then there would not still be this appeal to address disenfranchisement. Because if we mostly voted, then there would not be a topic anymore, right? Number two, the data that supports this notion that most blacks vote, it's based on mostly middle class blacks. So you cannot have data samples that are mostly blacks of higher socioeconomic status and then try to attach that to most blacks, including poor working class blacks. So that's just something I want our people to understand. Also, in addition to not doing the whole vote or die routine, I don't do the whole vote blue no matter who thing. And I tell people this all the time. I don't believe in voting up and down, just one political party. I want our people to know what it means to vote across the aisle, because when politicians claim that they collaborate across the aisle, I don't let it to be their freedom to do that. I want it to be they have no choice because we voted in such a span of perspectives and approaches that they have to collaborate across the aisle, because you have people from different aisles, not just Democrat and Republican, but different aisles beyond that, who are in these political offices. So that's an example of understanding what it means to be an informed voter, because you're not defining blackness and black activity based on supporting one particular political party. You're saying that they all are lame. Now let's see how we can put the lameness together, and as a people, we combine it. And Harold Cruz talks about that, and I'll talk about Harold Cruz in a little bit there. So reading politicians' campaign websites, because if we're talking about poor and working class blacks, reading the websites is very important when addressing poverty, because if they're talking about the impact of social class, which can be the impact of schools, of health resources, the notion, even if they don't mention race, this is important to highlight. If they don't mention race, that is appropriate if it's based on this notion that there will be at least a trickle-down effect to impact blacks in a good way. And that's important to highlight if you read William Julius Wilson's works and other works. The idea was that as black people, we have to find different ways to get to this accomplishment for our people. Yes, those of us who do work regarding Marcus Garvey's focus, we can talk about race first. However, in the instances, and Garvey did this as well, in the instances where race is still first, but we're highlighting other components of our identities and experiences, because then we're collaborating with different groups of people who are not only black, with the expectation that there will be an impact for all people, because Africans have thousands of years of doing human rights work, right? So therefore, the notion is that we can get politicians to say this will benefit blacks and specifically benefit poor working class blacks if you're talking about addressing issues of income and employment and job training services as well. Okay? And so this is where I just talk about having access to libraries, publications, and just looking what politicians have. Because most politicians put jargon on their website. They put a lot of promises because there's no data, because most politicians don't read. They get information from their team members, campaign people. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of promises on campaign websites with the expectations specifically from black people that will support anyone based on their jargon without expecting the results after they're voted for and after the campaign is over and after the election. So this is why I just tell our people, we don't have to be so easily impressed. We don't have to act like puppies in an open field of grass. We can actually be very stern and very adamant about not approving any of these people, including black politicians, okay? And we don't take any promises. We don't want anyone to come dancing with us. I don't want any politician to come dancing with black people anymore. I want black people to stop taking photo ops with these people that these people are posting on their websites to get support from other black people because they've taken photos with black people, okay? We have to understand this routine is centuries. It's the same routine as centuries, just the same thing as when black people see white people dancing and they're like, oh, they invited us to the cookout. Look here. We're an intellectual, knowledgeable, accomplished people with thousands of years of sciences, mathematics, arts, literatures, musics. If all other people have to do is wear their hair a certain way and dance with us to be invited into our spaces, then that's the problem. And that's also the problem that politicians have adopted, okay? So that's where I get to 2D on this slide. We have to, instead of focusing on trying to change all these politicians, we have to contribute more to our own safety nets, our own preventive measures. So that's where we do have Black individuals and Black collectives who are raising money, they're raising resources to talk about what are we developing as a people in case something happens. I do not want it to be paranoia though. I don't believe in people acting like they are storing firearms and bombs and stuff in somebody's basement. Like that kind of paranoia does not benefit our people, okay? I want people to stay away from that. That's not really Black radicalism. That's paranoia. It's also connected for a lot of people. You have to understand, when you make our people paranoid, it also harms our people who have substance use issues and mental health issues. Okay? So stop the paranoia nonsense. Instead, talk about how are we building money together? How are we building health resources together? How are we building school resources together? And don't do the whole paranoia routine, because that's not really going to benefit us at all. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so this is where I just use Harold Cruz as an example. It's my homie, Harold Cruz is my homie, right? Okay. So, and I talk about Harold Cruz also.
Before you go there, I truly think that this should be its own conversation.
Yes, and we've done shows.
I was looking over the slides earlier, and I really think that this section on Harold Cruz needs to be its own conversation.
Yeah, so you and I did a show about Harold Cruz more than a month ago, and I think that most people are not really familiar. They might know the title, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual book, but it's just not familiar. And this is where I always encourage our people to learn beyond what's popular. Okay? Just because something's popular does not mean that that is the real knowledge sharer and solutions bringer for our people. Just the same way I say don't rely on schools to teach you, don't rely on organizations, including Black radical organizations, to be the ones to tell you this is what you read, this is what you believe. Again, liberation means knowledge development, means you can access your own books at libraries, bookstores, and on street corners, because we were the first people to have the bookshelves on street corners, right? So I want our people to just learn more. If it's the most popular book out there, I want you to learn beyond the most popular book. If it's a bestseller, I want you to say, hey, I'll read it later, because there's probably something else. I want our people to understand you cannot base your knowledge based on something that you did not think existed until 1960s. We have to know what our people have done for centuries, because Harold Cruz's cooperative plan was based in W.B. Du Bois's cooperative economic plan, which was presented in Du Bois's Dusk of Dawn, right? And it was actually quite similar to Booker T. Washington's plan, even though they hated each other. And of course, Booker T. Washington was the foundation of Marcus Garvey's work, okay? So in understanding that, it's important to understand how there's some commonalities. Even when people disagree on the most minute things, they are very similar. But our people will not know that, because they'll be supporting bestseller books since the year 2000 or the year 2016 or the year 2023 without knowing that these bestseller books are mostly citing non-blacks, or they're mostly citing the most popular blacks that you can find on these cable news networks that I don't watch any of them, instead of understanding where is it coming from as a people. You can't see wheels in a car and then smash all the wheels and think you're creating wheels now. You have to see the wheels in the car and say, okay, there's wheels in the car. How can I make sure these wheels are still working? What can I do to add new wheels? I can add new wheels, but I can't tear down these existing wheels. So that's what our people have to remember in terms of knowledge development. All right. So we can get back to the Harold Cruz real quick. And I'm just going to talk about him real quick, because we're going to do another show about him, right?
All right, and see, that's what I really, 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 really want is you to do a whole show on that economic thing that Harold Cruz taught. Because when I looked through it, I was like, okay, I've seen this, but I've seen it from other people who were not his contemporaries. They came after. So I'm like, oh, so that's where they got this from. Okay.
Well, they could have gotten it from him or Du Bois. So remember, Du Bois did like 70 years of work. So he went through so much as a co-founder of NAACP. He went through so much components of communism eventually, unfortunately. So he did a whole lot. So, but this particular part does come from Du Bois's Cooperative Economic Plan. And of course, I always provide a reading list and a shared Google Drive folders, so people can always contact me, or they can find my social media posts where I always have the links for all the readings up there. Okay, so Harold Cruz used Harlem as an example. So I want our people to understand there's a reason why Harlem has been a model for a lot. So like if you look to, of course, the Harlem Renaissance, right? The wonders of the Harlem Renaissance. That's a good foundation for our people's culture. And also, if you look to people like Malcolm X doing speeches in the streets of Harlem. Also, Queen Mother Moore did speeches in the streets of Harlem. And wonderful, my father used to see Queen Mother Moore doing speeches in the streets of Harlem. He also danced with her and met her at a conference back then. And so Harlem has many roles also because of Marcus Garvey, right? And so there's so many times where you'll read about the role of Black knowledge development, Black artistic development, and then you'll see Harlem mentioned a whole lot. So Harold Cruz used Harlem as an example. And one thing I want to highlight is that Harold Cruz and I, and many other people, we really want our people to develop more of our own concepts, theories, and research. Develop, integrate different approaches for our people. I really want our people to stop fighting each other. The same thing I talk about fighting over politicians and political parties. Stop fighting each other because there's different viewpoints. Just like when I talk about Thomas Sowell, right? You're not going to agree with everything anybody says. Like, even if you're the biggest fan of one person, if you hear the span of the work that they've done over the years, you're going to hear one thing that they've said or read one thing that they've written, and you're going to be like, I don't agree with that. That's what life means, right? I want our people to stop this falsehood that someone can do work, they can do writings, presentations, perspectives, and you agree with everything 100%. Like, even Dr. Huey P. Newton eventually started believing that Black capitalism can be effective as long as it's careful. Right? So what, you gonna start hating Huey P. Newton and the Black Panther Party now? You know what I'm saying? So we have to know how to integrate different perspectives, because our people around the world and our people in the United States of America specifically have some very strict conservative perspectives for certain topics. But then we have some very progressive perspectives on other topics. That's why I tend not to use the categories of liberal, moderate, conservative, and all that stuff, because it doesn't always fit.
Right.
Because like George Schuler was the first known Black conservative generations ago, and he criticized everyone. He also was an artist, and he criticized everyone. So I just want our people to understand what it means to have our own concepts, our own theories, our own research. That
has to be a show. That has to be a class. We need to know about George Schuler.
Yeah, I posted about George Schuler on social media. I actually have a shared Google Drive folder also, so we can do a show to talk about him. He criticized a lot of people. Harold Cruz criticized a lot of people as well, but George Schuler critiqued quite a few people. And there was one point where he and Ella Baker tried to do a cooperative economic plan together. It didn't work out, unfortunately. But if you're familiar with Ella Baker, that's an example of what it means as Black people, and specifically Black women, where you're trying to try different things and you're trying to integrate different approaches. Because again, she was not considered a Black conservative, but he was very well-known Black conservative. But the whole notion is that you're integrating different things because, again, when you speak with our people, whether it has to do with religion, whether it has to do with how people think their money should be spent by the government, there are some viewpoints that would be categorized as quite conservative depending on the resource. So this is why I don't label and stigmatize our people, because it's okay to disagree with each other. Okay? I tell y'all, the world's not coming down as black folks if we disagree on some things. So that's very important. But Cruz wants us to
I
have
really can't wait to get a really deep dive in this.
Yeah. So when we have more of our own concepts, theories, and research, it means that we can integrate other approaches, but it means that first we have to have our own foundation so that we're not so desperate to have everyone else. Okay, so of course he presented the social, organizational, revolutionary agenda, and the idea that he used for Harlem was to use the Harlem cultural components. What are the spaces in Harlem that can be used for our own people's cultural advancements? So Harold Cruz was a member of the American Communist Party. He abandoned communism because communism focuses on class. It pretends to be race neutral. So what Harold Cruz did is that he appreciated components of Marxism without being Marxist and without being communist. And he decided to integrate parts of it. Another critique that Harold Cruz had back then, and Harold Cruz passed away in 2005. So when I write about Harold Cruz and hip hop, he was alive when hip hop was still booming, but he never spoke about hip hop. But he did speak out against communism because the focus was on class at that time instead of talking about race. And Harold Cruz wanted it to be very well known that he focuses on race and specifically, quote unquote, Negro Americans. Which is also why Harold Cruz shifted from like a Pan-African perspective, because he wanted people to understand that we are Africans, but it has to be what is the focus of your people where you're located so that you can develop that culturally. And so culture was a central component of Harold Cruz. So this is where Harold Cruz was talking about making resources in small businesses in Harlem. And he said this can be applied to across the nation if it works. Making prices lower, improving the quality of resources, making the prices lower, creating more jobs. And actually having more resources such as classrooms, making medical resources, making resources for people who have substance use issues. And he also mentioned here looking at ways to combat crime and drug dealing for our people. So that's a huge deal. So what Harold Cruz is talking about here is it's political and economic development, because we have to develop our culture to have political power and also economic power. You can go to the next slide, please. All right. And so Harold Cruz also proposed to have an all-black community-wide political party. And just keep in mind that over the century, black people have created our own political parties. Oftentimes they're state-based. Sometimes they've been attempts at like a federal component. But even if that works, where there's an effective, long-lasting, all-black political party that's community-wide, and let's say they eventually qualify to be considered in elections, because you have to have amount of signatures depending on the state to be in the election. Even if that still happens, you have to still be critical of politicians. So even if it's an all-black political party, you still have to understand that they have a certain role, but they're not the full role for our people. So this is where Harold Cruz said, even if we have an all-black political party, black politicians and civil rights leaders have an important role in black life, but they do not, quote unquote, create new ideas and new images of life. Instead, that's the role of black artists and black intellectuals. So that's why I use oftentimes the phrase black artists, intellectuals, scholars, because if the central component of our people is culture, and developing our people requires a cultural development for our people, politically and economically, then that means it's artists, intellectuals, and that's interchangeable, because to be an artist, you have to be an intellectual. All right. And this is also where Harold Cruz says that being an activist without planning ahead and without having deep reflection is anti-theoretical. It means you do not have a conceptual foundation. It means you do not have a theoretical foundation. And therefore, you are self-defeating in your actions because there will not be consequences. So if we apply this to poor working class blacks, it means that we don't have any ideas as to help our people who are poor working class, and therefore it's not going to have any outcomes to benefit our people. And unfortunately, people are going to blame the government and so forth without an understanding that we have to have our resources to balance and buffer government effects. Like, we can't 100% blame government for everything, and we can't 100% rely government for everything. And that's what it means as a people to have the development of our inner world. And Harold Cruz's perspective in that case is similar to Du Bois's, Marcus Garvey's, Ida B. Wells, and the list goes on of our people who've been proponents of having this work to advance our people without relying solely on the government. Okay. Is there another slide, or is this the last slide?
So that was the last slide. That
Yeah.
was the last slide.
Yep. So this is just why I use Harold Cruz as an example, because when we're talking about addressing and reducing Black poverty, it means it's a constant process. A lot of times people think that changing economic systems and changing economic status for individuals and families and society in general, that it's somehow going to be a fix and then things are going to change. And we have to remember that it's a process. The same way when we talk about crime data. Crime goes up, crime goes down, and it can go up and down. That has nothing to do with political jargon and nothing to do with laws. That's just, they go up and down all the time. So the same thing with economic statuses and poverty. They can fluctuate. It can also be impacted by employment shifts, jobs being changed, companies being closed. And so that's why we want our people to develop more safety nets together, look at what our people are developing as a resource for each other. And that's the cultural development that Harold Cruz addresses. And it doesn't mean that we're not holding other people accountable. It doesn't mean we're not holding the government accountable. It means that we as adults are multitasking because, again, that's something cultural. I want our people to understand that more than a century ago, the original forms of Black nationalism, which of course includes Marcus Garvey's perspective, Black nationalism used white Jewish nationalism as one of the templates, because white Jews in the United States of America provided an example of what it means to have your own ethnic, religious background. And yes, you're part of the government. You need the government for some things. However, what are you developing for your own people? And so that's an important component when understanding how to utilize the government without being thrown into the government. And culturally, unfortunately, we're presented as a people who are reliant on the government. And we're not fully reliant on the government. It's just that we've fallen for some jargon from a particular political party that tells us to rely on them. Therefore, they don't fix issues because they're not supposed to. That's politicians and political parties do not fix issues. That's not how this happens. And they might fix one issue, but they fix it as a bargain for another problem that arises. And that's why we talk about things like they might fix one issue, but they're still getting funding from military gear that's funding military battles and wars on African lands, for example. So there's always a trade-off. So we want our people to understand what it means to be more self-reliant, and then that will balance some of the other effects there. And I'll stop there if there's any thoughts or questions you have.
All right. Well, hey, put your thoughts and your questions in the chat, in the comments. We're going to be looking at the chats and comments, from this point on and responding to them. Also, Doc's messages, her Google Drive, all the stuff that she normally puts out will be available on this show as well in the comment section in the show notes. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, leave them there. We'll make sure to respond to them. And make sure you go to the show notes and get access to the Google Drive and all the wonderful information that your professor has for you. Any last words, Doc?
Yes. So just remember, don't just disagree because you disagree. That's a big thing I want our people to remember. Don't just disagree because you feel some type of way about a title, you feel some type of way about a sentence. I want our people to think about the full span, listen, and do some readings, and then you can have a true discussion. And also understand historically what this entails. Historically, we're talking about work that our people have done for centuries across disagreements. When we're talking about helping our people who are struggling financially, that includes having access to job training programs and other resources that our people have done for each other, but we can also utilize resources that are elsewhere, outside of our community. But it's all about teaching our people how to balance without being quick to just disagree. Let's be quick to learn some more. And we can still feel some type of way, but feel some type of way while we're acting on what we have to get done. And that includes, you can feel some type of way when you watch the videos for us. But I still want you to listen to the videos before you comment. So please listen to the videos before you comment. Because you might say something and you didn't listen to the video because I already responded to something that you would say in the first place. So listen to the video.
Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond.
Grandpa Crump. Yee.
All right. Hey, I'm still learning Riverside, y'all. So, hey, this was another great episode, another great class, Professor Kimya's class. Hey, clap it up, y'all. Clap it up. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.